You have to help them feel comfortable. You have to guide them through the conversations. You've got to give them how to handle these difficult situations. That's an ongoing process for us because not every conversation with a new hire or with a seasoned employee is an easy one, right?
Hello and welcome to the All Onboard podcast, your go-to resource for all things employee onboarding. I'm your host, Thomas Kunjapu, founder and CEO of Cleary, and today we are thrilled to have Shawn Premer, the Chief Human Resources Officer at Consumers Credit Union. Shawn brings a ton of HR experience, most recently having been instrumental in shaping Consumer Credit Union's people-first culture, which has resulted in the organization being recognized as a best and brightest company for 14 consecutive years. So congratulations on that. Shawn's leadership in onboarding, employee development, and just generally creating a culture of excellence has been pivotal to that and should be a source of valuable insights in this conversation, and especially on how HR can really drive business success. Welcome, Shawn, to the show. With no further ado,
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
great to have you. So let's just talk about, first of all, you've been at Consumer Credit Union for 13 plus years at this point, which is just amazing in and of itself. I think we can just start there. Can you just tell me, how have you, your role, the organization, how has it changed in these 13 years?
Yeah, a lot to put it in a quick term. But when I was hired into consumers 13, almost 14 years ago now, I was really the first HR professional that they hired, first HR executive. They had an HR assistant for years. And it was really a leap of faith for me. So I had come from a bigger organization with close to 700 employees to jump in here to an organization of just over 100 when I came on board. But I could see the vision. I could see where consumers wanted to go, and I knew that I would have the opportunity to build it. Right. So I came in with a blank slate. I came into a great culture already. Our CEO was committed to that, and it was a people first, family first culture. And so I had the opportunity over the last almost 14 years to really build on that and create an environment where HR is the partner to the organization, but also a place where employees can share their ideas and their thoughts and collaborate so that we can continue to make our organization better. So now, fast forward almost 14 years, we're 430 employees. We are 2.4 billion in assets. When I started here, we were 354 million. And all of that is organic growth. So it's not through merger and acquisition. Haven't done that in my time here. Doesn't mean we never will, but we haven't done that in my time here. So it's really been our ability to build this organization full of people in a great cultural environment.
So when you grow organically, and that's 4 or 5x, but it's also like probably slow and steady over multiple years, there's a built-in advantage in that you can, with every new hire, really impact a specific direction that you want culturally, right? So I think one of the things we were talking about was cohort-based onboarding, right? So could you tell me a little bit about how you do that, and also maybe how the program for it has evolved over time?
Yeah. So when I first started here, we would hire in cohorts only, and we only did it because our turnover was so low and we were small at the time. But we would only hire maybe 4 times a year. So every 3, 4 months, we would have a new hire, and it might be 10 people, it might be 15 people,
Mhm.
but generally it was 78 people. Obviously, now we're 430 employees. So even though our turnover is still low, the number is higher, right?
Mhm.
And we're constantly growing and creating new positions. So we
Mhm.
hire on a monthly basis, except for January. We never have a new hire in January. It's so difficult to coordinate that over the holiday season. But we hire every month. We hire in groups. Sometimes the group is six, sometimes it's 22. It really just depends on what the ebbs and flows are of new positions, turnover. So it's evolved in many ways, but for the most part, the heart of what we do, that cohort hiring and
Mhm.
sticking to it 100% of the time, has not changed in probably 25 years for consumers. So it existed long before I came, and I think it will exist long after I retire as well.
You said you have constantly redesigned it and looked at it in detail in terms of what is the process like
Hmm.
multiple times in that period, and especially with scale. One of the things you already mentioned, obviously, is how often you might have start dates to have a cohort. The
Hmm.
concept of cohort seems based onboarding and really sticking to that seems like it's pretty. religious almost there, like over all this time. And by the way, I want to state that is unique, right? Most organizations, because of managers or particular employees, they end up getting pulled into just, okay, just do what you have to do and get people in all
Mhm.
the time and go away from that. So you've stuck to that, which is pretty unique, I would say. But then what have been some of the evolutions and learnings along the way?
I would think the foundation of how we hire is culture, right? And it's values. So we do have a values-based hiring system. We also have a values-based firing system, right? So we'll
Mm,
hire and fire based on values. And so we stick to that 100% of the time. Now, back when I first started with the credit union, it looked very different, right? I was a
mm,
one person show. We weren't hiring that many people. I did have one person assist me with recruiting, but for the most part, I was it. I didn't even have a training person at the time. So we would bring employees from the organization, have them help train, and it was a 2-week process. So you brought in all of these employees, whether it was 5 or 20,
mhm,
and they sat in the room for 2 weeks. And while that might have worked when we were small, as we grew, it it just wasn't as engaging as you'd like it to be, with information overload. And sometimes we found that the employees still weren't retaining as much of it as you would like, right
mhm,
out of the gate. So my second year here, hired a training manager, right? I'm like, we've got to find a way to do this where it sticks better, where the information is sticky, where their learning goes on past their couple of weeks in a very formal way. So as we've gone along, we've been able to abbreviate the time to fully functioning in their role,
mm,
but it's actually only 1 week in the office with several formal learning and touch points throughout their first year, right? So that first 6 weeks is pretty intense, right? You're 1 week in the office doing formal training, then you have a formal training plan. After that, you're coming back together once a week in a cohort style to continue learning, typically virtually at that point, because not everybody can travel in each and every week, but they're coming together once a week and then they have their formal learning plan. They have a mentor that they're assigned at hire. And then we have somebody on our HR team that is actually just in charge of their whole first year experience. So they're doing check ins with both the manager and the employee throughout the experience, figuring out where we need to make tweaks. Where does this individual need to learn more and spend more time?
mm,
So while we're bigger, we're hiring more people, it's actually a much more individualized approach based on role, based on how quickly they learn, versus in our first iteration when I first started here, where it was really the same learning plan regardless of role. So that's the
mm.
evolution that we've had. Of course, I have a much bigger team now, right? Instead of a team of one and a half, I have a team of 10 of us, right? So we have the ability to serve the employee at a much deeper level than we had when I first started.
And being a credit union, I imagine a lot of the folks that you're bringing on are working in the branches and interacting directly with customers, and you're multi-branch. So when you're talking about virtual, it's talking about bringing people in cohorts across branches together, right? Who are in a similar kind of role. How that training period happens between what you'll do centrally with HR and your team and versus either the branch or like the department, right? So if you have, like tellers, there might be a whole department and excellence associated with that. But maybe for some of the, I don't know, more specific departments, they have their own advanced like training. So how do you juggle those kind of vectors, right? Locations and specialization by department combined with your overarching 1 year long journey from an onboarding perspective?
That's a great question. When an employee comes in, the first 3 days is pretty much the same for everybody because that's really where we're teaching you about who we are, our products and services, helping you, regardless of what role you're in, even if you're in HR or you're in accounting. It's really important that you understand the products and services here and what we do and how we do it, our culture, how we serve each other. So that first 3 days is pretty much the same for everybody. And then it's after that 3 days that they go into their individual learning plan based on their role. 2 years ago, we actually took on a large project of working with every department leader in our organization to create a training plan for every role. And it may not be every individual role, but if I'm going into an accounting position, let's say, I have a very specific training plan based on accounting systems processes, right?
Hmm.
Things that we do in that department. So we have about over 100 positions in our organization across multiple departments. And now we have training plans, 1 year outlines of a training plan for each of those. So it was a huge undertaking, but well worth it because, as well as I do, more than half of our hires are 100% interactive tellers. So interactive teller technology here. So not only are you a teller, but you're a teller on video, just like you and I are talking here. There's a huge learning curve
Hmm.
in that. So half of our employees are that, or they're an MSR in the office where they're serving the member, or they're in our phone center, which is all very similar from a
Hmm.
learning plan perspective. But the other half, a lot of times in organizations like ours, they feel like they get hired and then they're just put out on their island. And
After
they're
those
like,
3 days, right? Yeah.
yeah, after those 3 days.
Hmm.
So that's why we took the time and effort to make sure we could create a learning plan for each department. That way, when you come in, you still get the mentor, you still get some learning. Now, some of that learning has to be virtual and it's not things put on by my training department because we don't have that particular skill set. But either way, you have touch points and learning milestones throughout your first year. And our employees evaluate us every year on how we're doing, and our scores in terms of how they feel prepared have increased significantly over the last few years because of that initiative alone.
Hey, it's Thomas here. Hope you're enjoying the episode so far. Are you curious to see how your onboarding program stacks up against the industry's best? Check out Theory's latest onboarding assessment tool. It offers in-depth analysis and customized recommendations to enhance every aspect of your employee onboarding, from pre-boarding to company culture integration and more. Whether you're just setting up your onboarding program or you're a CHRO at a Fortune 100 company, this assessment can improve your onboarding know-how. Check it out at gocleary.com/onboarding-assessment. Again, that's gocleary.com/onboarding-assessment. You can also find the link in the episode notes. Now back to the show.
That's incredible because you can put a measurement to a significant program and undertaking. Now, if you were to rewind the clock and to just before those 2 years ago, when the decision making came around to invest that time, like you said, it's a huge undertaking, right? What were the data points or the conversations that led to the company making such an investment? Where I've seen that evolution many times where you have a mature program for basically the biggest department, which is
Mhm.
whatever that customer service or sales or engineering or tellers, whatever the thing is that tends to be the biggest operationalized role. But then there's like a big gap, right? And then how do you actually get there? Because I'm not sure many companies get there, right? To that saying, let's broaden that out.
Yeah. So, what's really interesting is we track our employee engagement very closely, right? So, over the course of a few years, I kept seeing the number just fall just a little bit. And keep in mind, our employees are highly engaged here. So on like a 1 to 6 scales, our employees say we're a 5.35 out of 6. So very high. And so that score was high, but I kept seeing it go backwards just a little bit. Right.
Mm.
And when you start to see the number go backwards, you're like, "Hmm, it's still a high number. You could easily rest on your laurels, right, with the high number. But when you start to see it go backwards, you're like, I want to dig in a little bit." So my
Mhm.
team and I, over the course of 12 months, actually interviewed all employees in our organization to ask the question why. Why we ask you this question about you feeling prepared for your role. Why do you feel less satisfied today? Or why do you think employees feel less satisfied today than they did? And that's
Mm.
what we were learning. We were finding out that while we do a great job, or we were doing a great job with our tellers, MSR, phone center, the
Mhm.
rest of our employees felt like they were coming back to their desk and learning from their manager, but they didn't feel like they had what the other employees had. So it wasn't a bad experience, but they knew they weren't getting that experience. They knew they weren't getting the same experience as our other hires that we hire so much more of. So we said, what can we do as a team and a department to make this better? So we started talking to managers, we started talking to employees. And so that was our process. And for us, because the number one item on our strategic plan is people first, it that's the business case, right?
Mhm.
So our whole strategic plan theme is growth through culture and performance. So culture's number one. And so if you have a segment of your employees, which is now about half, that feel like, oh, I'm not getting
Mhm.
the same learning and same experience as these others, that's your business case, right?
Mhm.
We've got to make sure that all of our employees feel included in that learning and growth process here at the credit union.
Got it. So it's the strategy plus this data point around like a slight dip in uh, preparation level, right? In the onboarding period, and you're seeing discrepancies based on like department, which you want to pounce on and act on. That makes perfect sense. And it's not like there isn't an onboarding program for the 50%. Obviously, like different managers are doing different things, different departments
Mhm.
are doing different things. One of the things that employees are doing is comparing notes with their friends in like
Yeah.
other departments or the folks who were part of that 3-day program who are part of their
Mhm.
cohort and seeing that like
Mhm.
week 2 and month 2 and 3 is quite different, which
Mhm.
is almost creating that demand partially to actually implement this, rolling it out to the remaining 50%. So I imagine it was a very collaborative like effort, right? So I imagine were managers involved or
Mhm.
obviously like your train, like your teams, and how did you go from what was happening to basically getting some coverage for beyond 3 days for the entire company?
So our onboarding, she's essentially like an onboarding specialist that we have on the HR team, sat down and met with every single manager, gave them an outline. Here's the job description for this role. Here's what a normal learning plan looks like. Look at this. We're going to sit down and meet and talk about milestones and learning points throughout their time
Hmm.
and what training we can give them to support. And so that's why it took, right? It took over a year to get all of these done because it's not a quick process. It's not like a checkbox.
Hmm.
Because our system here is when you're a new hire, you're loaded into our learning system, which we work with Seismic, which is a wonderful tool. You're loaded into the learning system and your plan is right there. And so the manager can see it, the employee can see it, and they're collaborating to make sure that those milestones are met. Or if they're not being met, they're not able to take time for the training, they're not able to do, they're missing milestones. Our onboarding liaison then will reach out and say, hey, manager, this milestone hasn't been hit. What's the challenge and how can we support the employee doing what they need to do? So at first there was some lag, right? Because it's
Hmm.
new. But once the follow-up was consistent, now it doesn't happen very often. The manager knows when they're going to be held accountable for making sure that employee gets the learning that they need and that they're following the plan in their first year of hire.
So you're talking about managers a lot, and obviously their role is important in actually executing on a plan for any said new employee. So, what is that manager enablement or training, or like if you're like a new manager, is there like a set of expectations or a unique consumer's way of doing things as a manager that you've come to?
Yeah. So every manager, whether they're promoted to team leader, they're promoted to manager, they go through a very specific training on what's expected that of them as a manager. So we do 3 times per year performance management. So they're sitting down with the employee and having performance and growth and development discussions 3 times per year in a very formal way. We have some very specific ways on how we lead our employees here to make sure that they know that we're invested in their development, that we want to retain them. And so we have to give our managers the tools, right? And you can't just hand them the tools, you have to show them how to use them. You have to help them feel comfortable. You have to guide them through the conversations. You've got to give them how to handle these difficult situations. That's an ongoing process for us because not every conversation with a new hire or with a seasoned employee is an easy one, right? So we really take time to make sure we're developing our managers the same way we're onboarding employees. It's an ongoing process that we manage. We just wrapped up our manager development even for this year, which was a 3-part series on accountability and how to balance empathy with accountability. So it's all of these pieces that we give our managers to make it as easy for them as possible, but then we hold them accountable for it, right? So you've got to follow through and carry out all of these great things that we provided for you in onboarding and performance management and all the ways that we best engage our teammates to retain them.
I have to ask, so is every new employee then by month they're expected to have that first performance management conversation with their manager? And that's just the standard?
Absolutely. Yeah, depending on when they're hired. But the first meeting is really all about goal setting. We like our managers to sit down. We have a system to put in goals. That same system helps manage performance. We fully expect in that first 3 months that the manager is sitting down with the employees. Now, the goal may be as simple as completing all the training for your job, right? Doing some job shadowing, because that's one of the things we like to happen in the first year. So those goals can be
Got
very
it.
first year, but they're definitely setting those goals.
So one of the conversations I've had in the past is about the chasm sometimes between the onboarding process where you're rolling out the red carpet, telling people how great they are, how we're so happy to have you here, and then that first performance review conversation with the manager where all of a sudden all these gaps are revealed, right? So this concept of just frequently doing those check-ins and like having that expectations within the first 4 months of something like that and that cadence setting it helps prevent that honeymoon period that then leads to the shock of, "Wait, this is actually how I'm doing," in the first
Yes.
performance conversation.
And our performance conversations are not, hey, here's your four on your performance review. You're meeting expectations. Our conversations are more, how is the employee performing in relation to their job? What are the areas that they still need to work on developing? There's no rating system. Here's the things you're doing really well. Here's the things that I want us to keep working on so that you can perform at your best. And here's our plan for the next 4 months, right?
Mhm.
Until the review cycle hits again, and then writing some goals inside of that. It really makes it more of an organic conversation so the employee knows that you're invested in their development versus like, you're not doing well and
Mhm.
I never told you that, but I'm going to tell you that right now in this performance review. So we have a rule here that says no surprise performance reviews because you
Love it,
should
yeah.
never learn anything in a performance review that you haven't been talking about all along. There's a different place for that. And we have one-on-ones that I meet with my team twice a month. A lot of our managers meet weekly with their employees and document some one-on-ones so that they can have that ongoing conversation about how you're performing in relation to the expectations.
So, we've been talking earlier about how the onboarding program has evolved a bit, right? While there's some core elements, including the concept of cohorts. I'm curious about being a bank during COVID. Obviously, you made some changes to everything about how you operate, including how you would onboard talent. What, if anything, has stuck as process and changes that you implemented as an emergency, but are now part of how you do business?
Yeah, before COVID, we did very little virtually. Everything was in person. We would bring all the employees back. Like I said, we do those weekly check-ins. We would bring them back for a half day. At that time, it was like once a month. What
Mhm.
we learned through COVID is now we can do these virtual check-ins and make them much more frequent. It also helps us with some of the online learning. So let's just say we do mortgages here, right? And we do home equity lending. So if you're a certified home equity lending, you do that learning online
Mhm.
to learn how to do that. But then you get together in a virtual environment where you sit down with a subject matter expert, do some role playing, do some
Mm.
practice, ask some questions. We would have never envisioned that prior to COVID. So I think there are pieces of where we went too far. We were doing so much virtual learning that people were like, we're burned out. So now I think we've got the balance of doing the right things in person and then balancing that out with virtual learning and video sessions with subject matter experts. I think that's been the best thing that came out of COVID
Mm.
is really learning that we have 29 locations spread across the state. So the fact that we can do more now in a virtual environment successfully is probably the best outcome.
That's awesome. So let me also ask a question, which is usually top of mind for folks who are listening to this, where they care about their employees. They want to invest in something like employee onboarding and just general training. And one of the things is really all about alignment and trying to get alignment from everyone that's necessary to make an investment, right? So you talked a little bit about that already, about how the way you get alignment is partially just through the company strategy, right? But then I know you also look at just your overall turnover rate and trying to keep that extremely low, especially compared to your industry standards. So, how do you think about, Shawn, like connecting that to the onboarding process? And especially for folks who are in the midst of trying to just get internal stakeholders aligned on just, hey, we need to invest in this. There's some clear signs and it's going to lead to better engagement, lower turnover. How do you make that connection?
I think it's actually easier than people think it is because when you think about the cost to recruit, you think about the cost of training a new hire. It's very expensive. And our recruiting cost is very expensive because we have a 5-step process that involves a lot of people. Because again, we hire on those values, right?
Hmm.
So this process is so expensive. And then I just told you what we invest, right, in new hire training, very expensive. And so if I turn someone over in the first year, it's probably double their annual salary. Is if you
Hmm.
hired someone at $40,000 a year. You've
Hmm.
spent about $80,000 when you think about the people involved in training and onboarding and hiring.
Hmm.
I have conversations all the time where they're like, the employee stopped showing up on the 5th day. The employee stopped showing up after 3 weeks. And I just gasp. Like to me, I'm like, that's so expensive. So if you can just put the dollars into that in first year turnover, you could make your business case for improving onboarding, which is what I did. As a matter of fact, when I hired in here almost 14 years ago, our turnover was just about 20%. So industry average. We were this great organization, but we were turning over 20% of our employees. And the CEO says, first thing I want you to do is cut that in half. I was like, okay. And it seemed funny at the time. And we've really done that. Now we've had some small spikes here and there, like during COVID, we had zero turnover. Just after COVID, we peaked up to 14%. But generally we stay real close to 10% turnover, which is healthy, I think. You've got to have the right amount of churn in your organization to keep the culture strong and those types of things. And so when I started to make the business case of what changes we were going to make to reduce that turnover, it became so easy because turnover is so expensive. So I think if you know how to analyze that data to say, here's the cost to hire, here's our cost of training, and then you equate that to, hey, if we make this one change, we can save several $100,000
Hmm.
in a year, 3 years, whatever your cost is. That's the business case, right? So it's actually pretty easy, but I think there's sometimes more fear in
Yeah, I think you're right.
the ask. I hear so many times I could never talk to my CEO about hiring in a cohort.
Hmm.
And I challenge that thinking because you can show the data to support it and make an impact on your organization long term. It makes sense. But I think there's fear, and that fear is what holds people back more so than the business case itself.
Yeah, I think you're right because we have a Cleary onboarding ROI calculator that's like no matter how you try to do it, it's like really hard to have like negative ROI with like investment here. But what ends up happening is if you have your average salary for 1 year and then you think about the cost today, the fear-based mindset would say, let's reduce the cost for onboarding as much as possible, hold turnover constant, right? Reduce that so that we're spending less. And then you start getting into a vicious cycle. And then if companies get there, it's usually either turnover in leadership or just a key hire or two leading to qualitative stories. And it's not anything about the numbers. It's qualitative stories about, oh my goodness, we lost this amazing person, or like literally
Mhm.
just one person that like starts to be the impetus for turning things around. But I love that point about just fear because there are people who would stare at the numbers and try to look at it any which way and just see that's what it is, but still not feel like they can
Mhm.
make that case. So I love that encouragement to just take that to mean what it is, right? To actually have this presentation. It's an investment just like any other program or department, right? In the overall future of the company.
Yeah, and cohort-based learning doesn't have to be a year-long process like ours, right? Even if you can get people together where you're creating that engagement. What I love here is I still connect with the people that were in my new hire group 13 years ago. right? And it's fun when we get together. And it's just like your college reunion, right? So you come to a networking event and
Yeah.
cohorts will take pictures together. And this is the October 16th, 2012 hire group. I think there's that camaraderie that you build in that family environment.
Hmm.
So even if it's a few days in a cohort based environment, and then you have a good learning plan ongoing, I think that can work really well. I love ours here, but ours may not work for every organization, right? If you're in a manufacturing environment, that might not work. But I think building culture from day one is the key to retaining your teammates long term.
Hey, it's Thomas here. Now, you and I might think it's obvious that people are your biggest resource, and investing in your onboarding program to make it world class is a bet you want to make. But how do you talk about this with your CEO or CFO so that you can get them on board with investing in an updated onboarding program? They're always looking for something that can save money and boost productivity at the same time. Well, I've got something exciting for you. Check out Cleary's onboarding ROI calculator. It's easy to use. Just enter some info about your current onboarding process and your company and see how much time and money you could be saving with a modern onboarding solution. Head on over to gocleary.com/onboarding-ROI to give it a try. See what you learn and let us know what you think. Again, that's gocleary.com/onboarding-ROI. You can also find a link in the episode notes. Now, back to the show.
Yeah. But one very specific asset to having a cohort based onboarding program is that, and even if it is manufacturing, whatever the kinds of employees that you have, if you're taking that opportunity of those first few days to create connections with people that you're maybe not working with directly. Right now, you're creating a networked organization, right? Where people are, at least on a social front, like caring about each other across different areas, which can lead to internal mobility conversations and just like knowledge of what's going on from different angles, which can only strengthen the organization going forward. So
Absolutely.
I'd love to shift gears and talk a little bit before we run out of time, Sean, just about the future. So the next 13 or 14 years.
Or
So,
11, because that's when I'm going to retire.
okay, fine. All right. I think it's hard to forecast where everything's headed, like even 6 months down. But
Mm.
yeah, okay, I'll take it. Let's go 10. The HR space and just even broadly, like how we work in all sorts of like industries and how we come together, it's, shifting all the time. So what are some, big things that you have your eye on, right, for you and your department as you look to the next few years that's just shaping the way you're, thinking about either how you hire, your investments, what people need, what you need from a great future-proof HR team, which is one of the themes that I'm also like looking deeply into. What comes to mind as you look ahead?
Yeah, I think the hot topic in everybody's mind is what impact is AI going to have on HR, right? Or that's conversations or every training session out there right now is the impact of AI in HR. I think I'm excited about the opportunities that will be in front of us as we can look to be able to maybe and serve our employees 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, right? If we have an AI assistant in HR. I don't fully trust one just yet, but I think it will. I think it will evolve. So it'll give us the ability to work at a higher level and more strategic and potentially some of those transactional things that we're helping employees with on a daily basis that might be able to help lighten that load.
Mm,
So I'm excited to see how that evolves. And I think the training of an HR professional is definitely going to be higher level on the technology side, right? AI, data analytics. So I think as these young people are coming in, they're better equipped now, right? Than like I didn't even have a phone or a computer until I was well into adulthood. So I think it's going to be natural. It's going to be a natural evolution of the HR professional as they come out of Gen Y, Gen Z. I don't think it'll be a difficult shift, but I think it's a different thinking as you look at Gen X and even millennial leaders are going to be leading those folks that are going to be stronger on that side. So I think as you look to build your teams, I think that's important. The other thing I think is the changing demographics with the Spanish speaking population in our country growing. I think that's something to be well aware of because we know in the next 25 years, English as a first language is going to be less and less in our country. So I think being
mm,
prepared for that in our organization. So that's a huge initiative we're working on right now is English as a second language. And so looking to beef up my HR capacity. So we're doing a great job on the member service side, but then now I have to think about the employees as about 15% of our employees now are bilingual and aren't necessarily American born. So how are we going to make sure that we're creating the organization also that suits them? So I think those are some big things on my radar over the next 10 years and how it's going to be important to evolve. Because if we don't, we're going to be behind the game and our competitor will be getting that talent, right? Because they're
Mhm.
going to have better preparation than we do if we're just not keeping that top of mind. So that's our focus here. And I think for HR people across the country, it's got to be important as they're looking at their education and career
Yes,
trajectory.
I wanted to ask about that a little bit deeper. So, if you're uh, talking to someone who is just coming out of college and is like exploring getting into HR, like what are the kinds of things you imagine would be what's advice you might give them? And also, is it any different than if you were talking to that same person a decade ago, right?
Definitely different than a decade ago. Then I would have said, "Hey, make sure that you understand the technology that we had a decade ago and how that's going to impact recruiting," which it has, right, in a very
Hmm.
positive way, and onboarding and all these things that we're doing. Technology has been
Yeah.
a key, right? I think now you fast forward 10 years, that technology is totally different. Like everything 10 years ago is going to be antiquated 10 years from now. So really keeping your eye on that. But I think I'm seeing a lot of things from like Wharton School of Business, a lot of programs focused on data analytics. So I think if you're pursuing that HR degree, that's great. But then as you advance your education, I think a master's in HR is okay. But I think if you had a master's in data analytics and a master's in MBA versus getting that master's in HR, that's going to be a better bang for your buck long term as
Hmm.
you look at your well rounded business ability, not just the HR side. So that's my advice. And also, if you can minor in a second language, that I think that's huge. If I were to look back on my
Hmm.
degree many years ago, I'm like, oof, my mom told me I should have done that and I didn't. And so now I'm really trying to learn a second language at my age and I'm getting there, but I'm not great at it yet. So I think those are the things that I would encourage young people to do today.
Yeah, so it's interesting. It's you're saying technology, business, and language, and it's like the core HR stuff can maybe be relatively right. Could be like on the job kind of
Oh,
training and,
absolutely.
and growth.
I don't have an HR degree. So
Right.
I've been in HR for 30 years, but I have a business degree and an MBA. I think every organization manages HR differently anyway. So you've got, as long as you know the logistics, and there's so many certification programs and
Sure.
HR education, you can grow your skill set. But at the end of the day, you have to understand business and you have to understand the trends in business to be successful in HR.
This has been great, Sean. Without any further ado, can I get us into the lightning round where we're gonna go
Absolutely.
just like a few seconds? What's gonna come top of mind? All right, let's go.
Sure.
So first, just to get to know you a little bit more, coffee or tea?
Coffee.
Okay,
Actually,
so
both, but coffee first.
okay, but if you had to, okay. What's the best advice then you've received about managing people?
If you care about somebody, you owe it to them to share the real feedback.
Love that. Do you have a favorite vacation spot?
Anywhere there's sunshine.
Huh.
So it could be mountains or water, but there's got to be sun.
Okay, fair enough. There you go. It's a Midwestern speaking there. Okay, here's an interesting one. So, if you could revamp one thing about the way every company does employee onboarding, could just change one thing, what would it be that you mandate universally?
Understand the individual you're hiring and make sure you tailor a plan to them.
That personalized aspect. So, do you have a favorite hobby that you have to unwind with?
I do. I like to run. That's it. Go out for a run, clear my head, and kind of reset, especially if I'm having a bad day.
That's awesome. So, are you like a marathon runner? One of those kind of folks?
I have
Oh,
run
wow. Okay.
marathons and half marathons, about 20 total. But now I
Wow.
really
Okay.
focus on 10Ks, 10 miles.
Oh,
Now I'm hitting
these
over
really
30.
these short ones.
the short ones.
Unbelievable. That's awesome. Okay, last one. You mentioned you got into HR so many decades ago. When you look back, what was the impetus to get you into it? And then what keeps you in it?
Yeah, so I took a job as a recruiter to put myself through college. So that's what I fell in love with. So recruiting and onboarding is my foundation and where I've been. And I really love connecting people to purpose. That's what keeps me here. I love helping people find what they're passionate about and have a good long career. So that's what keeps me here.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Shawn, for this amazing conversation. That's all the time we have today. So that's a wrap for today's episode of All On Board. One more time, big thank you to Shawn for joining us and sharing all of your insights. And for everyone out there, join us next time on All On Board. Till
Thank
next
you.
time.